Nos acompañan como conferencistas el señor Bartosz Kwiatkowsk, director general de la Asociación Polaca de Gas Licuado de Polonia. Y también nos acompaña la subdirectora de demanda de la UME, Jessica Arias. Le damos la más cordial bienvenida al señor Bartosz. Bienvenido.
Buenos días. No hablo español. Necesito presentar en inglés. So that's about that, what I can say in English, in Spanish. So thank you for the invitation to Alejandro and the entire team of the Colombian Liquid Gas Association. And I'm privileged to be able to present today the good practices and the perspective on Autogás in Europe and specifically in Poland, on my home market. Oh, does it work? Can't see it working. Should be good now. Yeah. So briefly, because Adrian presented yesterday a very comprehensive perspective on the geopolitics of LPG across the world. But just briefly, today, most of the global exports of LPG comes from the United States and a little bit more, and well, much less from the Gulf states. So top exporters are basically the United States and Gulf states. Top importers, sorry for the top exporters on this chart. That's my mistake. China, India, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, all Asian states, and Mexico. So actually, when I'm talking about Poland, we are pretty far from the main hubs of LPG globally. And the balance of trade, the balance of the market is shaped mostly by the export of American LPG and the imports from in Asia, particularly in China. But coming to the issue of Autogás, LPG in Europe is still the most common alternative fuel in the European Union, and it is despite all the talk about electric vehicles. LPG still rules. If you look at the figures, actually, across the EU, almost 3% of passenger cars is powered by LPG. Two major markets are Poland and Italy. In case of Poland, it's 13% of the total passenger vehicle fleet. In Italy, it's about 7%, according to the data of OEM of the car vendors. In EU total, it's almost 3%. If you compare that to the battery electric vehicles, which constitute only 1% of the European vehicle fleets, it's still much more. The rate of growth of the electric vehicles in Europe is much higher than in case of LPG, but there are some countries in Europe, like France, where the growth is double-digit in case of LPG. Why should we talk about Poland anyway? Poland is far away, so why should we talk about that? Poland is the sixth largest country in the European Union in terms of the GDP and the 21st global economy. It's pretty large in terms of the European Union because as you know, the European countries tend to be slightly smaller. So we have 36 million people. It's about 8% of the total European population. We are a bit more rural country than Colombia, for example, because 1/3 of the Polish population lives in rural areas, what is particularly important for the LPG market, because LPG is primarily rural fuel in Poland. Coming specifically to the LPG market, Yesterday, we heard a lot in this room regarding the self-sufficiency and the imports of LPG into the country. Poland is very much reliant on imports. About 80% of LPG market in Poland is import, and only about 20% is produced locally. But like my Chilean colleague yesterday said, these 20% of domestic production comes from a raffination of crude oil that is entirely imported to Poland. So you can even say that the resource that we are using for LPG production is entirely imported. Consumption of LPG in Poland is about 2.5 million tons. It's one of the largest markets in the European Union. I would say top 5. But what is different to other European Union countries is the share of Autogás. Autogás is 3/4, 75% of the Polish LPG market. It's much higher than anywhere else in the European Union and comparable to the share of LPG, of the Autogás in the Turkish LPG market. So I heard a question before this panel about the trends concerning the LPG market in Poland. It's pretty stable for many years, but it was growing about 10 to 20 years ago. That was a very sharp growth in Poland. We'll move to the reasons behind that growth a little bit later. Market figures. Today, about 13% of all passenger cars in Poland is propelled by the LPG. 53% is petrol, 33% is diesel, and I wanted to stress that currently almost all of the fuel stations in Poland provide LPG to the customers. We have about 7,500 fuel stations in Poland. According to the recent data, 7,400 of them are providing LPG. Every year, we have about 95,000 new installations in Autogás, but in case of Poland, these are mostly conversions. Concerning new registrations, new OEM installations, it's about 10 to 12,000, so the rest are actually conversions. And the Polish market for conversions boomed like 20 to 10 years ago, and we now have the entire industry of conversions built from the scratch. The companies that are with a global range, global outreach, like AC Stack, which we had Carlos talking yesterday. Carlos is a representative in Peru of the Polish AC company. What made actually Poland the Autogás country? Well, we need to move back a couple of years, well, about 20 years. Poland then in 90s was a pretty poor country after the economic transition because we had like 50 years of socialism in Poland. So in 90s we had something what was called the shock therapy. Very radical market reforms, very much the free market introduced into Poland, into this pretty poor country, because in 90s we were on par with Morocco and actually much poorer than Egypt or Syria. Since then, the Polish GDP tripled or almost quadrupled. So what we had a pretty poor populations that wanted to live like the Western neighbors, like Germans. So they started to import cars. They started to import Volkswagens and Audis, but these were pretty big cars, used cars, which were pretty expensive to maintain. What was needed was actually a cheap fuel. And LPG was the answer. There was also a supply of LPG. There was a supply of LPG from Russia. And so we had all of these components in place. We have the need for cheap fuel. We have the supply of cheap fuel. We have had influx of new cars, which were ready to be converted into Autogás. We had a deregulated economy and companies ready to embark on this challenge, or this road to implement LPG into Poland. These were small companies, these were SMEs ready to embark on a risky adventure, because that was an opening market. And what was important is that LPG actually was provided first on the fuel stations operated by small companies, not by the national champions, by small companies which were ready to expand into the new market. What made it easier on the side of the government? And we are now moving into the incentives that the government offered. First, the industry with the government agreed on a set of the state-of-the-art regulations for the market. Because what is the most important for the development of Autogás is safety. Because nobody can actually live through an accident caused by LPG. So there was a lot of pressure on ensuring that the new industry, Autogás industry, is very safe. So these state-of-the-art regulations were adopted. Then a big step forward was to allow the self-refueling by customers. Because some customers, we are moving into the behavioral concerns. Some customers just didn't want to ask the staff of the fuel station to refuel LPG, to refuel gas. So after a long campaign, also including education of customers, we were able to enable customers to self-refuel cars on the fuel stations, and then the market boomed. The government also offered the lowest possible excise tax rate that was allowed by the European regulations. Because we have in the European Union something called European Tax Directive that sets minimum tax levels on all sorts of fuels. So in case of Poland, the excise tax for LPG is set at the lowest possible level that is allowed by the European Union. Also, the LPG, our Autogás, is exempted from the fuel surcharge. Why it was done? Because the government made it a solution for the poorer people, to make this fuel affordable. Also, the industry is enjoying the preferential approach to compulsory fuel inventories. What does it mean? That distributors of LPG doesn't need to maintain the inventories, the reserves of LPG in the form of the liquid gas. It could be maintained partly in the form of petrol. Because in case of the Autogás market, we are talking about dual fuel engines, right? These cars could drive on petrol. So the government allowed to maintain these compulsory reserves partly in the form of petrol, mostly actually in the form of petrol. And what do we have in Poland today? If you look at the prices, we did an analysis for the 2023. It's pretty easy to convert, by the way, because 1 Polish zloty is roughly 1,000 Colombian pesos. So to drive 100 kilometers in Poland in 2023, 21 zlotys, so 21,000 pesos were required in last year. Petrol, in comparison, was 46 zlotys, or 46,000 pesos. Diesel oil, 45. Electricity, 37 zlotys. But that assumes that the user of the EV is charging the car at the commercial changing point. So it's maybe a little bit less relevant. look at the structure of the retail prices for transport fuels, because it provides you some good insight into how the government is treating the LPG. If you look at these violet parts of this chart, you have the comparison of three fuels: Autogás, diesel, and petrol fuel. The excise tax in the total price of LPG is much lower than in case of other fuels. What does it mean? That actually the profit margins of distributors for LPG are much higher today than for other fuels. So basically the revenues from sales of the LPG at fuel stations in Poland are about 13% of the total revenues. But the profit margin is much higher than for other fuels. And so we did a customer survey this year regarding the perception of LPG. According to the Polish population, 49% of the respondents agree that LPG provides also environmental benefits for the country, particularly in terms of air quality. 20% of all respondents in the past have driven an LPG car. 20%, 1 in 5. And 41% of the actual users of LPG are driving their cars because of economic benefits these cars are providing. I'm not going to focus very much on this complex chart. But what I wanted to stress, in 2017, an American West Virginia University did a survey on the environmental benefits of LPG in comparison to other fuels. It was not a single survey. It was a comparison of about 20 other studies done in the past by various academic entities across the world. What is the general implication of this study? That LPG reduces PM emission from the cars. So generally, it helps to reduce the smoke phenomenon, what is very important for Poland, because in case of Poland, 5 or 6 the most polluted cities in the European Union are Polish. So actually, air quality is very high on the political agenda in Poland. And LPG is providing us a clear solution for that, particularly in case of smaller towns. And a case study here. Case study provided by Dacia, Renault Group, which introduced a broad range of models into Poland. Right now, in total, 51% of cars sold by Dacia brand in Poland are Autogás. In some cases, like Dacia Jogger, even 71% of sold units are LPG. So it's really dominant. Dacia also, on the basis of their own calculations, provides the data that the total cost of ownership of an LPG car is by 40% lower than in case of the petrol car. As you know, LPG cars are dual fuel. But users of Dacia cars are using primarily their LPG tank. So 85% of the users of these cars are using only LPG, or almost only LPG. Some are combining that, because if you are using LPG tank and petrol tank, you can extend the range of the car to like 1.2 or to 1.3 thousand kilometers. It's important for the long trips, of course. One of 2 customers of Dacia cars just didn't consider buying any other car than LPG powered. 90% of users, of current users of Dacia cars in Poland are convinced to or are prepared to buy an LPG car in the future as well. So that's about Poland. Let's move to other countries, to other good practices. As I said, Poland and Italy are two major markets for Autogás in the European Union, but these are very different markets. Poland is a conversion market, LPG is a vendor market, it's an OEM market. What happened in Italy 15 years ago? During the economic crisis, as we may all remember. In 2009, Italians introduced serious incentives for buying Autogás cars. There was a clear subsidy for those that were interested in buying LPG car. It was motivated both by the air quality and also by the revenues of the users, of the population, which were falling this time. So they were supporting buying a new car, which were cheaper to run, basically. So what happened? In 2009 and 2010, when the subsidy was in place, the number of sold LPG cars just exploded from 56,000 per year to 329,000 per year. And it was maintained for 2 years. Then Italians canceled the subsidies, and obviously the sales fell, but they stabilized at the level of more than 1,000 units per year, and they were stable since that. So subsidies has a long-term effect. They were introduced only for 2 years, but they had a long-term effect because they introduced on the market a number of new models, and they prepared the population for using the cars. They are no longer something worse. They are completely approved by the population, by Italians. They are liked by them. And this year, 14 years later, Italians introduced yet another subsidy, this time for conversion of old cars. And this time it is motivated specifically by the air quality in their cities. So this year, it's a short-term subsidy, only for this year budget. They offered 400 euros, so it is probably about 1.8 million pesos, right? For conversion of a single car into LPG. So you can find a lot of information regarding the support measures for LPG development, for Autogás development, in the World Liquid Gas Association study. But I just wanted to focus on a couple of most important elements. So first, to ensure that the market is developing quickly, you need to have cars on the street. So it's good to have an OEM providing cars for the market, or otherwise, you need to have conversions providing an LPG car or Autogás car for any customer that is interested to have them. So the supply of cars or conversion is of critical importance. The second part is the availability of Autogás. The Autogás has to be available on the fuel stations across the country. And I heard yesterday also a discussion what is the egg and what is the chicken, right? In that part, what is more important to develop first, whether cars or the fuel stations? And in case of electric vehicles, it's different, because in case of the electric vehicles, this dilemma was already solved. The infrastructure is more important. So you need to have an infrastructure, so the charging stations before you have cars. In case of LPG, it's different, because as I said, these are dual fuel cars. So in some cases, if the guy or if the driver has a car propelled by LPG, he can also refuel petrol, right? If it's not available. In case of Poland, we had first conversions into LPG for pioneers of the market, and then these more entrepreneurial fuel stations followed. And since then, both the fuel market and the car market developed simultaneously. And the third most important part, in my opinion, are people. So you need to have the trained people which ensure for the drivers the safety of the car they are buying. So you need to have people prepared to maintain these cars, to provide installation of this conversion. You need to have these people, because lack of the personnel will generally discourage people from buying from even considering the LPG car. And just to review available incentives across the world. I'm not going to delve into the specific countries here, but what are the most popular incentives, I would say? First, fuel tax exemptions or rebates. These are probably the most widely adopted across the European Union because of this energy taxation directive. The energy taxation directive, as LPG is considered a transitional fuel, an alternative fuel, it provides a lower minimum rate than in case of other transport fuels. So most of the European countries are providing some tax exemptions or rebates on the excise tax. The second specific group of incentives are vehicle tax exemptions or rebates. These are very country specific. They are not regulated by the European Union basically, or they only must comply with the principles of the free market. But generally they are very country specific. In case of Poland, they are not available. We have a very old, I would say, obsolete even approach to the taxation of cars, depending on the volume of the engine. But in some countries, you can count on the rebate on the vehicle tax if you are buying an LPG car. There are also incentives for conversion or purchase of new Autogás cars. Case of Italy, I just mentioned before. So in some cases, the countries are just stimulating sales of LPG cars because either because of the costs for the customers or because of the environmental concerns about their quality. Yet another are alternative fuel fleet mandates. What does it mean? In many countries, also in the European Union, particularly government authorities, in some cases also companies, are mandated to have a share of alternative fuel cars in their fleets. Across the European Union, inclusion of LPG cars into these mandates are not very popular. I don't know any specific example in the European Union. But in some cases across the world, the LPG cars are included in these mandates. And examples are Canada, Korea, or United States. And the fifth one, I just wanted to indicate specifically, and which is not included in the WLGE paper, are low emission zones, because it's a big issue right now across the European Union. So what does it mean? In some cases, it is something that is decided on the municipal level, not on the national level, but on the municipal level. So local councils for specific metropolis can introduce specific privileges for some transport fuels. And the French, for example, introduced a sort of a certificate system that is called Critère, that allows some types of cars to get into the city centers. For example, an Autogás car can enter the street center of Paris. A diesel car cannot. In case of Italy, it's also quite popular, but I would like to stress that it's being resolved on a specific municipal level. Normally, the central government is not going to meddle into this specific regulation. In case of Poland, we have a low emission zone in Warsaw right now, and the government left the option to introduce Autogás for specific cities. So in case of Warsaw, they decided not to explicitly allow LPG cars and treat them at the same level as petrol cars. But in case of other cities, it may differ. So that's about that. Let's treat it as an opening speech for the panel. And thank you for your attention.